Is everything all good between the New York Rangers and Jacob Trouba? Chris Drury talks about Trouba, Kaapo Kakko, Stanley Cup aspirations, and more. Plus, we evaluate Chris Drury's performance after 3 years on the job.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1142 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. So, going to go ahead and talk about some of the talking points to come out of Chris Drury's recent call with the members of the New York Rangers media. Obviously, a lot of things to discuss. And I think one of the first things that kind of jumps off the page, and it's something that even when this was announced, when we found out that Chris Drury was going to be meeting with the media, you knew this was going to be a topic that was going to come up. And that is, of course, everything going on between himself and the rest of the Ranger front office and the New York Ranger captain, Jacob Trouba. Obviously, this is a very dicey offseason. And some 24 hours later here, we can discuss what Drury had to say about Jacob Trouba and the relationship between himself, once again, and the New York Ranger captain. So he was asked point blank, where do things stand with Jacob Trouba? This is what Chris Drury had to say about it. Jacob and I have conversations all the time. He also mentioned that they spoke multiple times over the summer, and then he added, he's very clear with where he stands with me. I'm excited to have him back. I know he had a terrific offseason. So very, bare bones stuff, very generic GM speak, which is kind of Chris Drury's style. I mean, if you were looking for like super juicy quotes coming out of Chris Drury from yesterday's meeting, then probably you probably haven't been paying attention to how he talks during these media sessions, because he does tend to play things pretty close to the vest and keep things a little bit on the generic side. I mean, he'll give you a little bit of info about this or that, but I don't think he's going to go into too much detail between himself and Jacob Trouba. I do think that overall, Jacob Trouba at this point, it's pretty obvious he's going to be back. Every now and then you'll see people, on social media say, trade Trouba. At this point, it's basically pointless, because if you were going to move on from Jacob Trouba, the time to do that would have been before free agency started on, that Monday afternoon at noon. I don't remember the exact date, but if you were going to make a move with Trouba, that was the time to do it, because you guys know how it is with free agency. Once it starts, everybody just flies off the shelf, so to speak, and they sign with this team, they sign with that team. There's a couple players that linger here and there, but you're not going to see any splashy moves after the first 24, maybe 48 hours of NHL free agency. So at this point, there's really no purpose to trading Jacob Trouba, and I do think that, I'm hopeful at least, that both Trouba and Drury, they're professionals, they move on, things happened, it's over. Jacob Trouba is back with the Rangers, and he's got a job to do as this team's captain. Something else that is mostly fan-created, and I've even talked about it a little bit on this podcast, but it's the status of Jacob Trouba as the captain of the New York Rangers. Could they go in a different direction for this upcoming season? Could they give the seat to somebody else? Is that at least possible? I don't think there's like a 0% chance of that happening, but I don't think the chances are very likely, and it's a move that I would not make if I'm anybody involved with decision-making with the New York Rangers, because the fire is finally starting to die out a little bit. There hasn't been a whole lot on the Jacob Trouba front as far as him being bought out, being waived, being traded, any of this stuff, all the drama that was going on there. So to me, people are excited right now. Ranger hockey is back. We just had the rookie camp. We've got traditional training camp coming up, and the first preseason game is now just 4 days away, so obviously looking forward to that. People are happy and they're excited, and everybody's kind of forgotten about this Trouba situation at least a little bit. So to me, the fire is dying out. Don't pour gasoline on the fire by stripping Jacob Trouba of his captaincy, seemingly out of the blue. I don't think there's any real point in doing that. And as much as Jacob Trouba struggled last season, especially in the playoffs, I don't really have any issues with the job that he's done as Ranger captain. They seem to operate a pretty tight ship there. He seems to hold guys accountable, and they've done a lot of winning over the last handful of seasons here with Jacob Trouba as the captain of the team. But this is what Drury had to say about his status as the captain. Jacob and I talk all the time, as GM and captain should. I would even include Lavi in those conversations. Obviously, being captain, he runs our dressing room and is head of the leadership group. We've had a number of different conversations over the course of the summer on a lot of different things. He is very clear to where he stands with me and what I think of him as a player and as a leader. I think he's done a real good job here as captain. There's so many moving parts that go in and out of being captain, especially in New York, and especially the Rangers captain. Excited to have him back, excited for training camp. I know he had a terrific offseason training-wise. As a quick aside here, does anybody ever have like a bad offseason? You hear, this happens in every sport. You hear, anytime there's some questions about this player or about that player, everybody gets back in the room, the coaches are back, the players are back, the GM's back, and everybody talks about, oh, he had such a great offseason. Does anybody ever like show up and say, oh, he had a lousy offseason, I'm not sure how he's going to do this season? I just always find that kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, look, Trouba's back at this point, and there's some Ranger fans that won't be happy about that. By that same token, there's some Ranger fans that really like Jacob Trouba, and they are happy that he's back, and they think he does a good job as the Ranger captain. And obviously, he's going to be a part of this team going forward. We'll see how everything kind of shakes out here. But yeah, I mean, to kind of reiterate what I said just a minute ago, I'm not making any changes as far as, the captaincy is concerned for this upcoming season. Also wanted to add one more thing, and we're going to move on to some other stuff in just a second. Got to talk about Filipino, his health, and his outlook going into the season as far as, his concussion history is concerned. Also going to talk about Igor and Lafreniere extensions, and Drury did touch on both of those things. But one last note that I want to mention real quick here is that Drury also mentioned, this is some good news coming out of Ranger camp, that the Rangers are basically 100% healthy going into camp with just two minor exceptions. Sounds like Ryder Korczak got what they said was dinged up over the weekend during that rookie series against the Flyers. Korczak obviously participating in those two games. So he's dinged up. Make of that what you will. And Riley Nash is dealing with the dreaded lower body injury, and he will not be at camp. Other than that, it sounds like everybody is healthy. That, of course, also includes Jacob Trouba, who was dealing with some things down the stretch last regular season. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. Chris Drury was also asked about Alexis Lafreniere, about Igor Shesterkin, a bunch of other things as well. Had some interesting quotes there as far as what could be on the horizon regarding extensions for Igor Shesterkin and Alexis Lafreniere. And we're going to talk about all that in just a second. And like I said, at the end of today's episode, going to evaluate Chris Drury and his 3 years on the job as the general manager and the president of the New York Rangers. And we'll get to all that fun stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sports book. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything going here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers, as always, the people that follow this podcast and follow the Rangers 12 months of the year and 365 days of the year. Call it whatever you want to call it. The true diehards, the people that live Ranger hockey. And also big shout out to anybody that might be new around here. Good time to check out this podcast. We do a different episode every single day, 5 days a week for the entire season, the entire off season, and just enjoy ourselves, talking Ranger hockey and breaking down all things blue shirts. But I want to mention for the everydayers, we're going to be going forward on this podcast, keeping an eye on training camp. The first on-ice day of training camp is Thursday. It's Wednesday as I'm recording this. And Peter Laviolette, a little bit later here today on Wednesday, is going to be talking to the media as well. So we'll be talking about everything to come out of the first on-ice training camp session, as well as Peter Laviolette's comments. And just going to keep things rolling throughout the offseason here on Locked On New York Rangers. Although the offseason is ending in just a couple of days here. I would say the preseason, that's sort of the end of the offseason because there's actual real hockey games. They don't count in the standings, but the New York Rangers are out there playing hockey, and I think that's what counts. But let's go ahead, keep everything going here with some other comments made by Chris Drury during his meeting with the New York Ranger media. Some more good news. He discussed Filipino. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks there. Most of it really just pertains to Filipino's health and his concussion history and what's his outlook for this upcoming season. Drury said very simply that Filip Chytil is a full go for camp, and I would assume that also means the preseason and the regular season as well. Said he is entering the training camp without any restrictions and that he is completely healthy. And I've mentioned this before, Filip Chytil is going to be a very, very important player for the New York Rangers this upcoming season. When you look at the depth chart and specifically at center, I mean, that, whoever you consider the Rangers' number 1 center and the Rangers' number 2 center, those two players, Mika Zibanejad and Vincent Trocheck, they're going to be centering the top 2 lines. I don't think there's any debate to be had there or any question marks regarding the status of those 2 individuals. But then when you look at the third line, it's going to be Filip Chytil if he's healthy, but that's the $1 million question. Can Filip Chytil stay healthy? And if he doesn't, who's the backup plan? I would think Johnny Brodzinski would probably slot in there on the third line. But regardless, Filip Chytil adds some scoring punch, has a heck of a shot, had a 2020 season the last time he was healthy, more than 20 goals, more than 20 assists, and you need a little bit of depth scoring. I mean, the Rangers are not unique there. I feel like every team in the NHL is always looking for a little bit more depth scoring, and you can always kind of nitpick that as like, we could get a little bit more out of the bottom 6 guys. But Filip Chytil is going to be absolutely huge. And obviously, fingers crossed, more so for, his own health and his own life that he can stay healthy, but secondarily to hockey as well, because he is a big-time X factor for this team and somebody that I think could help them quite a bit this upcoming season, if he can stay on the ice. But it's great news to hear from Chris Drury that it's something that had been speculated, but now, straight from the horse's mouth, Chris Drury confirms that Filip Chytil is a full go heading into training camp here. Obviously, another hot-button topic. It was a hot-button topic at the end of this preceding season's playoff run. It's a hot-button topic now. An Igor Shesterkin extension. Will this be happening? We got a tweet from friend of the show, Vince Mercogliano. We'll have to have Vince back on here, hopefully in the near future. Maybe we can get him on here before the season starts. But this is what he had to say on Twitter. Not much of an update on an Igor extension. Drury never discusses negotiations and declined to again this morning. He did stress that Igor knows how the Rangers feel about him and how important he is to their success. It's obvious they want to get something done before he hits unrestricted free agency. And I would think so. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that are going to look at Igor and they're going to say, you can't give him a blank check. And I agree that there has to be some kind of a limit here. You can't just, re-sign Igor Shesterkin for like $15 million a season. That would be lunacy to do something like that. Igor and his camp are said to want $12 million a season. That's pretty high too. I mean, that could be some posturing on the part of, Igor's agents and maybe even Igor himself a little bit. Maybe he's willing to sign a long-term deal for a little bit less than that. I hope that he is. I've said all along, though, I don't have really any issues with Igor Shesterkin becoming the highest-paid goalie in the NHL because you can make a case, over the last 5 seasons. I mean, he's been here for half a decade now. Show me a goalie cumulatively over the last 5 seasons who has been better than Igor Shesterkin, and you factor in, his performance in the playoffs as well. I'm not sure that goalie exists. And if he does, there can't be more than like 1 or 2. And this is just how it goes. As time goes on and as contracts get richer and richer, that's just the name of the game. Igor Shesterkin will very likely be the highest paid goalie in the NHL starting not this upcoming season, but the next season. But it won't be long after that before, somebody else breaks the bank. There's another superstar goalie who's about to become a UFA. He commands an even bigger dollar amount than Igor Shesterkin. There's a chance if the Rangers were to re-sign Igor Shesterkin, and let's say it's an 8-year deal, the maximum allowed for, re-signing one of your current players, there is a chance that at some point in that contract, we might see Igor Shesterkin as a bargain, which sounds difficult to believe. But let's go ahead. Let's say that Igor Shesterkin signs 8-year, $11 million. That will make him the highest paid goalie of all time in terms of average annual cap hit. Carey Price currently holds the record at $10.5 million. Let's say $11 million over 8 years. Now, originally, going into this upcoming season, he'll be the highest paid goalie in hockey. But again, the salary cap is going to rise. Prices of these contracts get bigger and bigger. And sooner or later, someone will eclipse him. And there will eventually be, a handful of goalies, not too many, but like 4, maybe 5 goalies in the league making more than Igor Shesterkin. At that point, he becomes something of a bargain. When you get to if he were to sign an 8-year deal, when you get to years, say like 4 or 5 of that deal, that's when you're going to be looking at it and say, Igor's, he's definitely worth every penny that we're paying him here. And you can make the case that that'll be the same situation right in the first few years of that contract extension. So we'll see how it goes. Again, it can't be a blank check. And there is some merit because I do see some Ranger fans that say, no, don't spend that big on a goalie. It didn't work with Henrik Lundqvist. It came close to working with Henrik Lundqvist. He was obviously a phenomenal goalie. They made a lot of deep runs, did make it to the finals in 2014, just were never able to win the big one. there's some merit to that stance, and there's some other good free agent goalies after this upcoming season that would cost significantly less than Igor Shesterkin would. But I think the Rangers in some ways have already kind of tipped their hands a little bit here, because if they weren't planning on shelling out the big bucks for Igor Shesterkin, then I think they would have been a little bit more aggressive in free agency this offseason. The fact that they didn't do that, they want to save some cap space for Igor Shesterkin. And I feel like, Igor probably wants to be here, but we could see some hardball on both sides. And I'm not 100% convinced, as I've been saying all along, that a deal will get done before the season starts. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe later today, they'll announce an extension. We shall see. But from Igor's point of view, and I've mentioned this before, I don't think there's a ton of incentive to sign right here, right now, because he's 1 year away from being able to talk to all 32 teams and get the best deal that he can possibly get for himself. Something else that I got to mention here, because there's been a comparison made from some Ranger fans on social media between Igor Shesterkin and all of our favorite player in the NHL, Sidney Crosby, right? So Crosby, the other day, either yesterday or the day before, I don't remember now, it all blends together at a certain point, but Crosby signed a 2-year extension with the Penguins. He was entering the final year of his deal. His 2-year extension is worth $8.7 million per year, which is basically what he's been making per season for his entire career. And there's some people saying things like, well, Sidney Crosby, league MVP, slam dunk Hall of Famer, one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of skates. If that guy can go out there and accept a home team discount, then why can't Igor Shesterkin do the same thing? And it's a fair question, but I would just like to point out their career earnings to date. Sidney Crosby in his career has made more than $152 million playing hockey. And that doesn't even account for like any kind of deals for like endorsements and things like that. So yeah, $152 million. Igor Shesterkin, to this point in his career, has made a little bit more than $18 million total. So that's quite the difference. Now, nobody's going to feel sorry for Igor Shesterkin. He is a pro athlete. He is getting paid very, very handsomely to play a game. And, he's set for life if he never plays another hockey game. But there's a pretty big difference there. Let's be honest about that as well. And, yeah, Crosby, I guess you can say that he has given the Penguins a little bit of a break over the years. $8.7 million is not chump change, though. And let's not act like he's playing for pennies on the dollar. With Pittsburgh all these years. So we'll see how it shakes out. It's a fair idea to bring up. If Igor wants to win a Stanley Cup, then maybe he can take a little bit less than $12 million per season. And maybe, that will help the Rangers in adding more players and adding better players and doing everything they can to win a Stanley Cup while Igor Shesterkin is a member of this team, assuming that he does sign that extension sooner or later. Also brought up was the idea of an extension with Alexis Lafreniere, and this one, to me, is not quite as urgent. It's not quite as big of a deal right now as Igor Shesterkin, simply because Alexis Lafreniere is a restricted free agent at the end of next season. So he does have arbitration rights, but he really can't go anywhere else. The Rangers still sort of have some leverage there. It could go to an arbitrator. You never know. But really, it's not a situation where he can just wave by and sign with some other team. It doesn't work that way when you're an RFA. But this is what Drury had to say about the idea of a Lafreniere extension. He was asked about this after they had asked him about Igor Shesterkin. So Drury had to say, in our eyes, he continues to get better and better. I'm not going to get into negotiations, but he certainly is an exciting young piece for us, and one that we hope, just like Igor, is here for a long time. And again, he's not tipping his hand here. Something that does help, and I touched on this a second ago when we were talking about Igor Shesterkin, is that it does seem like the NHL salary cap is going to continue to steadily rise in the seasons going forward. For this upcoming season, the one that we're about to play here, the salary cap is set at $88 million. That is a $4.5 million rise from the previous season, and that represented the largest jump in about 7 or 8 years. It looks like this has pretty much been made official for the following season. We're talking 2025, 2026. The salary cap is going to jump another $4 million to $92 million. So it does sound like it will benefit the Rangers that, the salary cap continues to rise. The most difficult offseason to navigate for this team in the foreseeable future is going to be next offseason, because that's when so many players need new contracts. Lafreniere, Igor, K'Andre Miller, even Kaapo Kakko if you want to keep him around. And you've also got Jacob Trouba and Artemi Panarin. They're both paid very handsomely. They're both entering the final year of their deal next offseason. So that's going to be the tough one. But I feel like with the salary cap continuing to rise the way that it does, the Rangers will be able to figure it out. And Lafreniere is going to get a nice contract. We'll see how nice when it happens. But same thing. I don't know that he's going to be signing an extension before the season begins. Drury was also asked about Kaapo Kakko. This is what he had to say. He dealt with an injury last year, and admittedly, he didn't have the best year. Another guy that had a terrific offseason and in early testing just looks great. I think he's out to prove that last year was a fluke, and he's ready to have a good year for us. It's great that Chris Drury wants to go to bat for his guy, Kaapo Kakko in this case, but the idea that last year was a fluke, I don't know that I can really totally agree with that. I mean, I get what he's saying. You know, he had kind of a fluky injury, and that obviously cost him a lot of time. But as far as like offensive production and points per game, it really wasn't a fluke. It's basically pretty much on par with what Kakko has done for his first 5 years in the league. He has been at less than a half point per game player for all 5 seasons. And for his career, he's got 117 points in 300 games. We can blame ice time. We can blame the fact that he's usually in a bottom 6 role. We can blame the fact that he's not ever on the top power play unit. That's all well and good, but he hasn't done anything to force his way into those roles either. Bottom line, facts are facts, 117 points in 300 games. So barely above a third of a point per game player for his career. Last year, 13 goals and 6 assists in 19 games. It was a step back from the season before where he had 40 points. So I can't really agree with Drury here and call it a fluke. You know, what happened to Kakko? I'm still hopeful. You know, hopefully Kakko can at least be a contributing member of this team for this upcoming season, but a fluke, I can't go that far either. So going to keep everything rolling just a second. Since this has kind of become a Chris Drury themed episode, we're going to go ahead and discuss his job performance for the first 3 years that he has been the general manager of the Rangers. Of course, he was assistant GM for a number of years before that, but 3 years as the GM of the New York Rangers for Chris Drury. And we'll talk about some of the things that he's done and give him what I would call mostly a vote of confidence. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so that you do not have to waste time searching through thousands upon thousands of tickets. You've got Gametime Picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You've also got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with none of those surprise fees at checkout. You've also got seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Absolutely love that feature. Some of you know I tweeted this out. I went to Green Day and the Smashing Pumpkins about a month ago. I definitely was using that to just kind of get an idea of what the stage was going to look like from where I was sitting. I'm glad I did. Really got some great tickets out of that deal. You've also got the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference, plus Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is Gametime. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. To go ahead and close out the day, I figure, again, we heard from Chris Drury and we got all the talking points and talked about Trouba, Kakko, Hedl, the 2 guys that really need an extension, Lafreniere and Igor. Figuring we might as well turn our attention to Chris Drury's job performance as a whole over the past 3 years. And what kind of gave me the idea to do this was a quote that was posted on Twitter. Chris Drury was asked to evaluate his job performance in his first 3 years as president and GM of the Rangers. This is what he had to say about it. It's been a real good 3 years. Obviously, our ultimate goal is to win the cup. Personally, I'm always trying to find ways to be better at my job and to do things that allow us to compete for the cup every year. That starts each and every year at training camp. Looking forward to having Lavi for a second training camp and hope they have a good camp and another good regular season and give ourselves a chance to get in the playoffs. So this to me was probably his most noteworthy quote of the entire thing. There's kind of a lot to unpack here, especially for a quote from Chris Drury, who, like I said, typically plays things close to the vest. And there's nothing like salacious about this quote or anything like that, but there is kind of a lot to unpack, like I said. He's absolutely right. It has been a very good 3 years. I know there's some Ranger fans that don't want to hear that because it's championship or bust. And honestly, I'm on board with that mentality too. I think once you get a team in place that is good enough to be in the playoffs, good enough to win a tough division in the Metro, good enough to win the President's Trophy, it does become Stanley Cup or bust at a certain point. That said, he's not wrong about what he's saying. The Rangers have been an excellent team, well over 100 points for 3 years running now. 2 appearances in the Eastern Conference Final. Had a chance both of those years, just came up a little bit short. And it's been fun. It's been fun for me to come on here and talk about the Rangers and talk about them winning far more often than losing, because the first couple of years of Locked On Rangers, and the everydayers know this, there was a lot of losing and a lot of figuring out, like, okay, where's the rebuild at and where are we going and who needs to be in the lineup, who should be here, who should be there. We don't really have to worry about that stuff anymore because the Rangers have turned themselves into a bona fide winner. So he's not wrong when he says it's been a really good 3 years, because it has, and they've had their chances. He also mentioned that this year's goal is to win the Stanley Cup, and that's the goal every year. And I love hearing that. That really should be common sense. And in a way, I feel like all 32 teams should go into the season with the goal of winning the Stanley Cup. Now, it's more realistic for some teams than it is for other teams. We know that. But I don't know. I mean, haven't you already kind of, sold yourself short if you don't see that as a realistic possibility? We've seen teams squeak into the playoffs, then go on some crazy runs in the postseason, in some cases even gone on to win the Stanley Cup. So it's something that's at least doable, but I think that should be the goal and the mission statement. And for me as a Yankee fan, and I've talked about this before, they're playing well. I mean, you got to give credit where it's due, but I just feel like the expectations have been lowered so far for that franchise over the years. You never hear anyone talking about wanting to win a World Series. When's the last time anybody involved with the Yankees has mentioned that? Well, the Rangers talk about it a lot. Panarin talked about it toward the tail end of the regular season last year, going into the playoffs. He said, we have to win the Stanley Cup. Of course, they did not win the Stanley Cup, but it's nice that that's the mission statement and that's the goal. And it's also nice knowing that, the front office sees it that way as well. Chris Drury, under no uncertain terms, said the goal of this team is to win the Stanley Cup. He also mentioned Peter Laviolette coming back for year 2 here. This is probably an underrated storyline among, and I include myself in this, among all of us. Peter Laviolette came in last year, and look, you got to learn a new style, a new system, get used to him as a coach. He's got to get to know his players a little bit. They don't have to go through any of that this offseason. They had a really successful season together last year. Laviolette's back. I think by now, pretty much, he knows what to expect from the players. The players know what to expect from him. And we just hit the ground running and hopefully get off to a strong start this season and remain among the NHL elite and hopefully ultimately be the last team staying in the team to win that Stanley Cup. So I do like the fact that it does feel like finally there's some stability there at the head coaching position. It's been a while since we've really felt that way. And you never know what can happen. But, I mean, that was an awesome first season for Laviolette. He did a heck of a job. And, I think it at least seems like he'll have some job security going forward. So as far as, assessing Drury, his first 3 years on the job, I would give him a grade of, I would say, about a B+. It would have been higher, honestly. But I feel like this past season's trade deadline was a little bit lackluster. And I feel like this current offseason has been a little bit lackluster as well. And I realize with this offseason, there's only so much he can do, right? Because of what we talked about earlier. Certain in-house players need contract extensions going into the following season. So I understand that to an extent. But I also feel like Drury, I gave him B+. He has pulled off a lot of moves that I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for. Certainly the extension for Igor Shesterkin, that was a leap of faith. It certainly worked out. Been one of the best goalies in hockey, despite not having a top 10 average annual value cap hit. The Trocheck signing for $5.63 million a season, that was phenomenal. And some people were critical of him when he did it. Trocheck has turned into just an irreplaceable player on this team. Some of the trade deadline rentals that he's brought in, whether, the first year that Drury was the GM, that was his best trade deadline class. Kopp, Vetrano, Mott, Braun, all those guys came in. All of them fit in seamlessly. All of them improved the Rangers, at least to some degree, that season and then the playoffs as well. Even the year after that, I know that, he brought in Kane, he brought in Tarasenko, also Mikkola and Mott again. And look, it didn't work. They lost in the first round, but I can at least appreciate the fact that he went for it. He understands that we're in this, whether it's him, the players, the coaches, us fans, we want a Stanley Cup. It's really as simple as that. At least he went for it. Now, maybe there were other moves that he could have made. Maybe bringing in Patrick Kane wasn't the best idea, although there's some Kane truthers out there as well that would have loved to have seen him re-sign with the Rangers beyond that 1/2 season there. But bottom line, at least he went for it. And he got all those players without giving up a single first-round draft pick. If I'm remembering correctly, there might have been a conditional that turned into a first. Not 100% on that, would have to look it up. But certainly did not give up a lot in the way of draft capital and not really anything in the way of prospects. I think the biggest prospect he traded to bring in, again, Tarasenko and Kane was like Hunter Skinner. So a nice job there as well. And sometimes, it's the moves that you don't make, I think, that can really stand out in a positive way as well. There were some Reindeer fans that were ready to give up on Alexis Lafreniere and saying they should trade him and this, that, and the other thing. And we saw Lafreniere break out last season. I think the sky's the limit for Lafreniere coming into this season. But Drury held firm. He stayed patient, and he believed in Lafreniere, and Lafreniere rewarded that trust this past season. Also, the coaching hire, Peter Laviolette. Only 1 year, but the Rangers had the best record in the NHL, certainly one of the elite teams in the league, and it felt like Peter Laviolette got more out of a lot of these players than we've ever seen any coach get out of them for any given season. So you got to give him props for bringing Peter Laviolette as well. He's had some mistakes too. Pavel Buchnevich, Patrick Nemeth, those are the two moves that I think really come to mind for me. You trade away Pavel Buchnevich. As I've mentioned many times on this podcast, I could at least follow the logic. He didn't feel like the Rangers could afford him, and wanted to open up the door for some of the young kids to take that spot on the top right line there. But the bottom line, he got a second-round draft pick for him too, which I believe turned into Will Cooley, if I'm not mistaken. So at least they salvaged something from the Buchnevich trade. But you can't look at that as anything other than a mistake, or at the very, very least, a very underwhelming return for Pavel Buchnevich. And Will Cooley might go on to be a great player, but at the time, it was just a second-round draft pick. We didn't know it was going to be Will Cooley. On the Patrick Nemeth signing, whoops, 3 years, $2.5 million. Basically had to bribe the Coyotes to take him off the Rangers' hands the following offseason. So that didn't work either. And as I mentioned earlier, I feel like I would probably have given Drury an A or an A minus had it not been for what was a lackluster trade deadline this past season. And I think a little bit of a lackluster offseason as well. You, at the trade deadline, you have the best record in the league. We're going to go for it. This is our year. A lot of guys having career seasons. And your three pickups are Roslovic, Wenberg, and Ruhwedel. And they gave up a second rounder for Wenberg. And look, all those guys, Ruhwedel only played 3 games. I guess we'll focus on the other two. That they contributed a little bit here and there. And I think they made the Rangers incrementally better. But you saw other playoff teams and other bona fide Stanley Cup contenders making bigger moves than that and improving their team more than the Rangers did. And one other thing that I'll mention about Chris Drury, and we can't properly evaluate him in this aspect yet. We're about to find out, though, pretty soon how good of a drafter he is. Because when you're the GM of a hockey team and you're in year 1 and you have, your first draft class, well, okay, it's probably going to be about 3 years until we see most of these players. Same thing in year 2, same thing in year 3. But, we're going into year 4 here for Chris Drury, and some of these guys are going to be along the way. Brennan Othmann was his first pick ever, first rounder. We might see him this season. He drafted other guys, like Ryder Korzak. Adam Sikora was a big pick. Bryce McConnell-Barker, who's somebody that I like. I think somebody that might be a steal. Victor Mancini, a defenseman taken in the 5th round, thought he was excellent in the rookie series over this past weekend. Gabe Perreault, these moves have to work out. At least a good amount of them have to work out. And if they do, I feel like that'll kind of reaffirm everybody's faith in Chris Drury as a GM, because right now we just don't know. We don't know how these guys are going to fare in the NHL. When you add up all of Chris Drury's draft picks, they've played a grand total of 3 games in the NHL. That was Brennan Othmann last year. But sooner or later here, we're going to start seeing these guys in action at the NHL, and then we'll have an idea of how well or how poorly Chris Drury drafted. I feel like there's some good prospects here and some guys that the Rangers feel good about, and rightfully so. But they got to do it on the ice, and we'll see if they're able to do that in the years going forward, possibly as soon as this upcoming season when it comes to guys like, Brennan Othmann, Ryder Korzak. We'll see. Korzak might be jumping the gun a little, but we will see. So figure we can pretty much call it there. Once again, if you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.